Loading. Yep. En dan push ik ook ons.
Super.
En Sipke, the floor is yours.
Okido. Even kijken, wachten we nog even tot er... Kijk, er zijn de mensen droppelen binnen. This is looking quite well. Welcome everyone. We'll be waiting for a little bit till the last people are joining the webinar. So we will be starting in about a minute or two. So guys, I think we can start the kickoff for our webinar 2020 under some very strange circumstances, of course, with the COVID. Today we will be having a webinar regarding the tipping point of test automation by Rick Tracy. He will take us along on his view. We will be discussing different points of view and different ways of test automation. Rick will be able to tell you everything about this. If there are any questions, you can ask these in the chat. We will be coming back to the questions later on, so we can see if there's maybe some overlap within the questions. After the webinar, there's of course also the possibility to engage in the discussion that we might be having for those who have questions or for those who would like to have a discussion on the things that we discussed. So for now, I would like to start off, and I would like to give you the word to Rick. I hope you will all enjoy, and we will obviously speak afterwards. Enjoy.
All right, thank you, Sipke. I'm going to share the screen here. Hopefully I get this right on the first try. All right, so you should see the welcome screen here right now. In which case I can say welcome. So welcome everybody. Today we're going to talk a little bit about test automation and, well, what that means for individual people, what that means for us. I want to welcome you to our virtual session. This is a rather strange experience, honestly. It's been a strange experience for about 9 months so far. As usually somebody during these talks could jump right in or ask some questions, or I'd be able to see you in the audience and know if you're looking confused or if you have questions. But since we don't have that now, I can really encourage you, go and use the Q&A section of this call, write down your questions when you have them. I will see them pop up sometimes, and perhaps that means I can answer them as we go, or we'll wait until the end to answer those. But the key to a good presentation is the good questions and the absorption that you get from it. So please do try to take advantage of that as much as you can. As far as I understand it, this will also be available to look back on via YouTube later. So if you've missed something, check it out again. With no further ado, let's take a look at the topic for today, the test automation tipping point. Now, what do I mean by test automation tipping point? I think we need to define some of our variables. First of all, what's automation? Simply put, automation is taking an action that you would do and programming something to do it for you. It's a software copy of a personal action. Sometimes we do this to translate ideas, like writing, which automates whatever the author would have said in person onto the pages of a book, for example. This also has the added benefit of making it standardized, depending on the language, meaning that any audience can get the same message rather than get a different message every time it's told, every time the story is told. That can also be an improvement that covers a deficiency in a person. If somebody, for example, speaks very softly or isn't somebody who likes to present, then writing can be a good substitute for that. Or it boosts a skill that they have, like an automated pitching machine for tennis or for baseball, which never tires due to biology. Only the tech parts can wear out. So automation can be enhancement, it can cover deficient, it can be seen as a replacement, but often automation is seen as a replacement of a person. And I don't really think that's accurate. I think it's more of a replacement of a process that a person is engaged in. And it's with that understanding that I'd like to go through this presentation, to understand that automation is not automating a person, but it's automating specifically an action. So lastly, for the definition, automation is not a permanent. It needs updating, it needs resources, and it needs application just like a person does. So there's a lot there with automation, but this is the definition that I'm using for the presentation. Who am I to talk about automation at all, actually? Well, as I said, I'm Rick Tracy. I'm the founder of Hopalion Consultancy. I've been doing testing and designing test strategies for a little over a decade now in various companies in the Netherlands and in Germany, along with my partners Quality Minds. I consider myself a test pathfinder. That's the cool little picture there of me wandering the path. I've automated testing and other processes in small companies, in large companies, in different industries, in different countries, and using a multitude of different tools. So with that, I hope I've gained a bit of perspective on different methods that work well and some that work less well in different contexts. And importantly, I've also planned and designed automation and process flows. So you will see during this presentation, the most important part of automation isn't necessarily the coding of it, but it's the setup and the design. But mostly, the reason why I'm here to talk to you today about this is because I like to explore and I like to figure out how things work to the best of their ability. And considering you're here watching this, I think you do as well. And automation really is no different from any other thing that we explore as testers. So what do we mean specifically about test automation? Because there's a lot of controversy over that term. There's a lot of debate around it as well. Some prefer the term verification, so verification automation. Others refuse to use the term automation at all, as they object to the idea of replacing testing activities with any kind of standard script. And some people, myself included, refer to any automation that has a communicatable impact on the quality of a product as test automations. It's not necessarily just limited to testers. That means in this presentation, you'll see me go beyond the traditional boundaries of testing and test automation and the test workspace, as well as refer to processes not done by testers as test automation still. So keep that in mind as well. In fact, one of the most important tips I can give you is that automation of any sort is best not left up to a single discipline, because it's going to have an impact on everybody in your team. So don't hoard it. Don't be like, I'm a tester, so I'm just going to do test automation. This is something that everybody in the team should have a hand in. Most organizations drift toward automation because of three reasons, the top three reasons in any case. It saves time, it reduces risk of operator failure, and it allows them to downsize operations. Now, that's not their only practical benefit, and I'd actually argue against the last point, but they're the most common reasons given. Some others would include focusing effort on certain risks, improving communication, combining test results in larger organizations, and aiding users in their acceptance tests and usages. Test automation can help make the flow of software go faster, it can run more effectively, and it produces results that are informative, consistent, and reusable. But it's not free. It takes time, it takes effort, and it takes investment. And that calculation should be made not just starting up to the first place, but also where to automate. So it's not just should I automate, it's where do you automate, and most importantly, where don't you? In the end, we need to be clear about the value that we're delivering as automators and for automation, so that it's clear for all those involved, be they tester, the manager, or the budget owner, exactly what they're getting out of this. Far too often, I see companies just say, let's do automation, without really understanding what they're asking. Can you really live without test automation? I mean, do we really need to invest in it? Sure. I mean, of course you can do it without it. Think about a river that you need to cross. Without any other tools, you can cross that river by swimming. It's no problem. It's just a lot of boring work and you get wet. And if you're not good at swimming, then it's also going to be a problem. But basically, this is manual testing. It's crossing the river just by yourself. But you could also buy a boat, and you could use that to get across the river. That prevents you from getting wet, and it's less boring work, and it's a lot more efficient. But it's only efficient if you have the right tools. If you don't have paddles, you're not going to get across there very easily, and in fact, it might even be even less efficient than if you were to swim. So the same thing, if you don't have training and you don't set the right goals, you're mostly just going to be going in circles. So if we're going to automate, how do we do it? When do we do it? When don't we do it? What do you need to have up front? And how can you best ensure that the investment that you make actually yields something valuable rather than just a really expensive boat that goes in circles? I'd like to present you with the 5 fantastic factors for fabricating fabulous test automation. And that was my tongue twister for the day. In order to make the most out of your test automation, I think you should focus on 5 different factors. The first is the approach and general goals of your automation. You need to know what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it, what we've been talking about this whole time. The second factor is planning and designing your automation. If you don't have a plan, if you haven't put forth a design, you're going to be in trouble. Setup and control of your automation. This is especially important in that a lot of teams don't have control of their environments, and we'll discuss why that can really be a problem here in just a little bit. Running your test automation and measuring your results. Measuring is one of the most vital parts of figuring out whether you've actually provided any value. And lastly, learning and improving your process. Each of these are important in their own right, but they also build each other up. So each of these factors are features of automation that can help build the whole automation up. The tips I have for you are far from the only tips for how to make good or better test automation, but they're by far the best ways that I've encountered so far to prevent automation from being wasteful and also to get the most out of it with a good return on investment. So with no further ado, my first tip. My first tip in your approach is to create automation teams. A lot of organizations set automation goals and then pass those goals onto the development teams without really any checks to see if every single person is capable of it, is trained. Now, instead of sending each of those people to an automation training course, it's a lot more efficient to create a team that specializes in the chosen tool and method of automation. And then that team engages each team in automating their parts of the overall process. I know it's not as fun as having everybody automate, but it does end up creating much more focus and much quicker build towards an automated structure that everybody understands. If you don't do this, often you will get different automation streams that don't always work together. And this works for smaller organizations too. It's more effective to have just a few experts and the rest are generalists in automation, just like any skill set. It's the same thing with the T-shaped testers. Same thing, you'd have a T-shaped automator. In larger organizations, you'll often see multiple teams working on the same system, and some of those will even be the same components of that system. In those cases, I would suggest creating what I call an integration quality team, which is a team that pulls all the changes from all teams together and runs automated tests like regression tests over the merging and the build and the eventual impact of those changes. They then communicate the results of this back to all the teams so that everything is seen in the big picture rather than the individual parts of a larger whole. It would not necessarily be the same team as the automation team, but there could be some overlap. Both of these are pretty vital to have a good approach for automation. In general, you have to focus your work one bit at a time and you'll be much better off instead of just diffusely hoping that automation will naturally grow in each team regardless of skill set. And again, one of the biggest problems with this is that you get a lot of different automation streams set up if you have everybody do their own approach and their own setup. It's kind of like gardening. The area that you focus on tends to have the most yield, and the area that you don't focus on, you usually find a few weeds there. And while some of those weeds might be valuable, it's really hard to integrate them into the full system without everything getting mucked up. So focus, figure out what you want to automate and get a team to do that. That's my tip number 1 for you. The next tip for the general approach is automate on every level. When we talk about test automation, a lot of times people think about testing at the end of the development process and setting a bunch of scripts up that verify whether we have the right information or whether we've covered the risks. But that's barely scratching the surface of what we can do. We can use test automation in design. We can set up automated impact tests. If we have a good impact document, we can have, if one thing is going to be changed, it'll automatically show what other things will be changed, and that gives us some scripts for later. We can do automated risk flagging. If it's mentioned that this system is going to change, it can automatically look at our risk factors and determine if this is going to be a medium, low, or high risk. You can do automated key feature tests, where a key feature that's being changed automatically sends that risk alert out again. And that's all just in design. If you take a look at the development process, you can set up automation change flags if a developer changes something that's already in your automation. You can use your automated tests to duplicate or build functions so that a developer doesn't have to completely build everything from scratch again. So you can kind of give a feedback loop to each other in that case. What they build, you can automate a test for. What you've automated a test for, they can use as a blueprint for new building. Even when it comes to just getting information from stakeholders, you can use Gherkin language or another translation method to style your user stories so that they very easily go over into automated test scripts. This is a pretty well-known feature. When you figure out how to get your users to write it that way, it saves a lot of time. It's basically automated requests. And you can also apply automation to user testing. This is done, I think, the least of all. We tend to automate within our sphere, and then we give our results to a user. But why not give them the same ability to run it with automated tests as we have, or maybe even build it with them, build an automated stream with them so that we can look for the things that they're looking for. That way you involve them and they are better able to understand your process, and they're also better able to test quicker and give you feedback faster, which at least for me was a big gripe in an organization that it kept taking a long time for them. So help them out. Automate on every level, and there's more levels than just this. Also, last one for the approach, you want to group together your automation. Individual automation is inefficient, and a lot of times it doesn't return a lot on investment. I worked with a developer who was very excited to show me one of the things that he had built. And he had built an automated step which picked our files from one server and put them on another server, which is something that normally we have to log into both servers and drag one to the other. And he said, look, this is what I think a really cool advancement. I thought so too, but then I asked, how long did it take you to build this? And he said, well, all in all, about 5 or 6 hours. Well, this particular file transfer that we were doing occurred once in production every 3 years. So you can imagine, if you do the math on that, the 3 seconds that it would have taken me to drag the files from one server to the other were definitely not a good investment of those 5 or 6 hours. However, we grouped them together. We grouped them together with any file transfer. We changed the automation just a little bit so that the process would skip us having to manually add these things to an automated step. And then we were able to scan whether these were the right files, whether they arrived there for any file transfer. And suddenly, we had ourselves a process that we'd automated, any file transfer process. And that was suddenly worth the ROI because we did a lot of file transfers. So when you group the actions together, then you go from an ROI negative to an ROI positive. And sometimes that's the only way to make your case for whether you should do this. Now, there's also times when you can't. There's also times when the amount of time it would take for you to automate an action, whether that's a process you're automating or a test that you're automating, it just takes way too much investment. At that point, consider adding a trigger for manual action. Just something that pops up while you're doing something else that says, hey, click this button to continue or something. That way you can still have it be semi-automated and do the manual action without interrupting your workflow all that much. Don't force everything to be automated if you cannot get the value calculation to work. I know a lot of people who try really hard and get very creative. Please stay creative, but if you find yourself stuck, just add a manual trigger. You'll be fine. Now, when it comes to planning and designing, the #1 tips is have a plan. And I know it sounds obvious, but in my experience, this is really not readily apparent to most people. Just asking people to automate gets you 13 different tools, dozens of automation streams, and hundreds of reports that no other team can translate. It's a mess. You need to have a plan, and that plan needs to be shared and agreed upon with everybody. If you leave it up to everybody to build their own thing, I'm going to say it again, you're going to have 13 different automated setups. And when you want to draw the whole project together, you can't. It's really hard to translate 13 different test results to the same document. Concentrate, have a plan, prepare ahead of time. Then design your tool. You really need to understand the tool that you're using. And there are hundreds of different automation tools. And these tools, they're very important that you do your research into what works well for your organization. There's tools that can do everything, and they will work for any team. But they are basically like using a nuclear bomb to swat a fly. Yes, it'll work, but maybe it's a bit much. There's also tools that just do the bare minimum, and then they won't do everything that you need to, and you can't get as much value out of them. So they're cheaper, but they don't really work well, or they're not versatile enough. And then you've also got tools that require a certain amount of expertise. Some knowledge of how things are programmed, or Selenium requires you to know how to program within it. And if you don't have that, you need to invest in it. You need to invest in trainings, you need to invest in your infrastructure, you need to make sure you have an environment where this can run well. And I've worked in plenty of projects where that just didn't happen. One of my particular horror shows was when I was working for an organization that were starting their test automation streams. And I had requested that we use a certain tool based on the feedback I talked to all the teams. And we said, okay, if we use this tool, we can use it for a year. And with this package, we can get training for an automation team. We can get real-time support. We can get 10 developer licenses to work on this. And it's a good package deal. Yes, it's got an expense to it, but it pays it back. And I've made the business case and whatnot. Apparently I didn't make a good enough business case, because what I got back was, sure, we'll buy the tool with 5 licenses, no training, and no coaching. Good luck. That honestly made us, it set us back by about a year in terms of our effort to get things automated. It set us back by a year in terms of being able to see any real results from it. And in the end, we had to ask for more licenses, and we had to hire a specialist for this tool, which cost us far more than that original deal would have. So you need to invest. You need to invest up front. You need to commit to it. And lastly, which I've capitalized here, you need to train your people. If you just expect them to get a tool and be able to run with it, I don't care what the vendor tells you, there is no tool that works out of the box without a little bit of training. You need to be able to figure out how the tool works so that you can get the most out of it. If you don't invest in how you build things, most of the time you're just going to hit everything with a hammer and hope it turns into the shape you want. Tools are meant to be used a specific way. Figure it out, learn, invest. You also should know your processes. This is probably the second most important part of what I'm telling you in terms of tips. So many organizations do not have a full systems map. They have individual maps for each individual team or component or system, but they don't have one for the entire system, the entire development process system, the entire production system. Or they have one, but it hasn't been updated since 2003. As you can tell, these are problems when you're trying to figure out what kind of an impact your automation is going to have, or what things you're trying to look for in terms of testing. When you have a system map, also make sure you have interface maps. If you know how things transfer from one thing to another, you can build better automation for that. You can build better tests in general for that, and then you can automate those. But again, if those don't already exist in your organization, get on it. Get these foundations set up, because not only will this help your testing and your understanding of the system in general, but it's also going to help make automation easier. And one of the best ways to make automation easier is to create runbooks. Now, for those of you who don't use runbooks, a runbook basically just tells you the steps that a process takes. And a lot of times when I test, I ask for a run book so that I can go through each of the steps and see where I want to put in a test, where something might be interesting, where something might fail or might have a risk or might show something I didn't expect, or where I can influence it. That's the same thing with automation. You would take those same tests in that same area and you would just plot, here's the test, here's the automated test. When you have a run book like that, not only is it easy for everybody to understand how it operates, so here we go, nice and DevOps, but you also then have an easy way to show people how you can test and how you can automate those tests. Again, run books, if you don't have them, start creating them before you automate, because it's going to make everything a lot easier. If you don't have a system map, get one. Sit together, have a lunch meeting, and map out how your system talks to the next one. Figure it out. It doesn't take a lot of time and effort, but it's worth every moment you spend on it. You should also establish improvement goals. If you don't know why you're automating, then you're going to automate in a lot of different and less valuable ways, because you really need to know, do you want to improve your speed? Do you want to improve the stability? Do you want less bugs in production? Be clear about what it is that you're actually trying for when you automate. I know it's tempting to just say, well, let's just automate everything, and I can make the business case of why it's valuable, so of course I should do it. But that would be automating just to automate. And that's not really any clear improvement goal. Why are we doing this? Again, it's nice to be able to tell somebody, yeah, we automated our systems, but why did we do it? What was the results? Did we see more stable systems? Did we see less bugs in production? And then choose which one you want to improve first and focus on that. All right, that's everything for the planning and design. Let's get into the actual setup and control. One of the first steps that I always do when I'm training somebody how to automate is I need to teach them to stop thinking that a human behavior is the same as an automated process. So one of the most common examples of that is pauses. A lot of times when somebody is testing, they will click a button and then they will wait to see the page load or to see whether the files are picked up or anything like that. One of the most rookie mistakes that I see people make is that they then program in a wait in their automation script. And they say, well, usually I wait about 3 minutes, so I'll just have it wait 3 minutes. But that's not really what you want. You want there to be some kind of trigger that continues the process. And that trigger is something that you as a person might not necessarily see, but the program, the system can usually see what it is, what the criteria are. So a trigger, in this case, is a lot more valuable than a pause. In fact, try not to use any pauses at all in your automation. Try instead to figure out what it is that you're waiting for. And when you have that, then you can map that to it. Not only does that mean you understand your process better, but it also means that your program has less of a risk in terms of, oh, no, wait, I should have waited another 2 seconds and then it ran. You have to ask yourself, what does the process do? And sometimes that means diving deeper into the process before, again, you've even started automating. That also takes time, but it's worth it. You need to control your environment. If you do not control the environment in which you are testing, automated or not, you're going to get problems. You need to know all the settings on there. You need to know what is influencing every bit of data in your process. You need to be able to customize those settings. And whether you do that yourself or you have a direct line with somebody who does, doesn't matter. But you need to be able to influence that. And you need to create a reset script that sets everything back to the status at the beginning of any test. That's vital for automation. If you run something once, and then you want to run it again, but everything you've done has changed all the settings, then your automation is likely to fail, or it's likely to find false positives or things like that. Every automation script should have a reset script for when you run it for the second time. Now, obviously, if you want to run something for multiple times and test what the impact of that is, that's a different test, but after that's set, reset it again. Whatever your automated test is at the end of that test, reset it and try again, or try a different test. I worked at a bank and I worked for a retail company, and both those had very different approaches to this. At a bank, they had full control over their environment. they set it up, they knew the configuration, they had batch parameters, and everybody knew how things worked inside the environment. At the retail client I worked for, they had put it to a third party whom they had change requests for, but they didn't really have any direct communication with them. And I saw so much difference in terms of how fast we were able to change things and automate things and explain things, and how frustrating it was not to have control of that environment. So please, if you have a third party that is managing your environments, talk with them. Get to know how they do what they do, have them teach you about the environment so that you know what kind of impacts it's going to have, and then create an open line of communication so that you two can help each other. And perhaps then they can actually build that reset script for you. Gives you one less thing you have to do. On that note, also control your data. You have to know what your data does, you have to know what's in it, and you have to know what uses your data. Another fun example from that bank I worked for, we were working to draw in all the different transactions from different places in the world, and each of those sent their own files, because every bank in every country has their own system. And we thought we had set it up so it translated everything over, except one country sent what they called a sub-instrument, which basically meant that the instrument ID, which we took over directly, could be one of 7 different labels. And the computer chose at random which one it did. So every time that I ran my tests, I got different test results. And I'd set it up as an automated stream, so there was no way that I was seeing, okay, well, why do I keep getting this different value in there? And this value was never correct from one test to the next. In the end, I had to dive in there manually and figure out that it was because there were 7 different labels delivered that my automation was just picking one of the 7 and going with that. If I had known my data a little better, if I had known that the data coming in from that country was different, I could have built that in. I could have selected just the top one or whichever one's the primary or anything like that. But again, you have to know your data in order to control your data, in order to make sure that your automation is going to run without a bunch of problems, without a bunch of false positives. When you run your automation, you need to be able to measure. And in order for your measurements to make any sense at all, you need a baseline. A lot of people forget to do this before they start automating. And then they just say, yeah, look, we can run it with this speed. Okay, and how long did it take to do it manually? Oh, I don't know. Okay, then what have we improved? You need to know what your baseline measurements are starting off. So if you haven't automated a system yet, but you do test it, write down the information, the metadata about your testing. How long does it take you to test it? How many people do you normally need to test it? Do you always get a result from this test, or do you get some failure rates from this test? Figure out everything from your manual testing, write that metadata down, and then once you've automated, compare it. But you need to have those baselines first to know what it is that you want to watch. And this also helps because then you communicate from the very beginning, from the very start of your automation, where you're going. And again, this can really help DevOps. And working together with operations, because then you can ask them, hey, keep an eye on the performance of this environment, or keep your eye on whether the amount of bugs in this particular key component goes down in production, whether you find less issues there. Work together with people, communicate where it is that you're going, and then again, you don't have to do this alone. You don't have to measure the impact of your automation alone. Managers, if there's any managers on this call, I'm going to tell you right now, this question needs to go away. And you can all walk up to your manager after this presentation and tell them to stop asking me this question. Percent of your system automated is meaningless. Because again, automation in and of itself isn't valuable. It's what you do with it that's valuable. So a lot of companies, pretty much every company when I started, hopefully not all of them when I left, but all the ones that when I started, they always asked me, how much of your testing or how much of the test process have you automated? This is the wrong question. It's better to measure what percentage of the chosen process is automated. So that way you can say, these were my goals, and this is how close we are to achieving the mechanism for my goals. and then shift it from that conversation to what I said before, the things you set up your measurement for. Do you find less bugs in production? Is it more stable? Are you being able to test faster? Do you get same or better results? We need to shift the conversation from how much have you automated to what has your automation brought us? So again, the manager asks you how much have you automated, switch the conversation into the results. You always got to keep switching that language, because right now it's too much of an industry trope that the percent you've automated is the main competing thing that they present to their boss, and then everybody talks about how much of their system is automated and nobody knows what it means. You also need to ignore known errors. Now, this is a very dangerous thing because I did this for a database. When I first started working out, I would run a test, and then when I knew something was wrong and would be fixed later, I excluded it from my next test. Unfortunately, instead of just excluding that case, I excluded the entire column, which meant that the 7 other bugs that I should have found, I didn't. And these were very obvious and very dangerous bugs that thankfully somebody who was more experienced than I had caught. And I have learned from that since then that you do need to ignore the known errors, but be careful. Build exceptions to the known and accepted errors to avoid waste of time in your automation. That means specific scenarios. So if the automation system would return with, hey, I found this, have specific things that says, if this value is this, then continue and don't flag the warning. A lot of times people build their automation reports with showing everything. And at one point, somebody had a counter that only went up to 999 errors, and it was 999 errors every single time they ran it, which meant that it would take, let's see, I think at that time it took about a week and a half just to go through that single day of automated testing, which was useless because by then they'd already run 5 more days, and the next week they ran 5 more. So looking for all the errors that you already know, write those off, make sure they don't interfere with the rest, or you're gonna miss the new items. But don't ignore everything. Make sure you know whether they're accepted and whether there's something that's going to be fixed or not. Be careful how you write those exceptions. Be careful about where you write those exceptions. This is one of my more trickier tips. If you have questions about this, I'd love to chat with you after the presentation, because this is probably the hardest one. So on to an easier one. For learning and improving, always refactor and simplify your test automation code. You can use automation to simplify the processes as well. If your automated verification shows that you can see it a lot easier if the actual development process changes a little bit, then suggest it as an improvement and create a feedback loop that way. So whatever a developer programs, you can then test, and then if your test finds that it's a little easier if they did it a different way, tell them. It doesn't necessarily have to be just good or bad. It could also be improving. But this also works for your own automation. So I worked with a tool where it read the input from an Excel. And originally I had it read 1 line, and then at a later part in the program, I had it read another line, and a later part in the program, I had it read another line. And whenever I needed to change things in this, it was a bear. It was not maintainable. So what I ended up doing is I programmed at the very beginning of the process to read every line in and translate it over into different variables, which any beginning developer could probably have said, duh, of course you should do that. But you know, I wasn't that experienced at the time. But this is an important tip. Always figure out how to do things a little bit simpler, a little bit faster, a little bit more efficient. And as your automation expands, look for places where you can simplify. You will find them. I guarantee nobody, no matter how good you are at automation, is ever going to build everything perfectly with perfect foresight of everything that's going to happen later. Go back, refactor, simplify. Then make your dashboards talk. A lot of people have dashboards that show the status of different test results, that show performance statistics. Share these results. Share them for alerts, updates of any data. If a team has any changes that are incoming, the test results from each of the teams, share them on a centralized dashboard. And I call this the God dashboard, the general overview dashboard, which is a lot of fun because then you can tell everybody that what you did today, well, I created God. I always like to say that's a fun one. But when you do, make sure that this is something that can apply to everybody and that everybody knows how to access and use. Because when you can explain the results of your test automation without using individual tests, but using a dashboard, it's a lot easier for people and it's a lot more accessible for people. It's hard to combine all of these by yourself, so this is a group project. This is something that everybody who is working on automation should pitch into, so that we all know that all the right streams are heading to this single point of truth. Last tip for the learning and improving, actually the last tip on these factors, you need to plan your freed up time. When I said before that a lot of managers look to automation to downsize, I think that's a mistake. I don't think you should use test automation to then say, well, now I need 3 less testers. Because testers right now, and I'm sure some of you have felt this, you can't do what you are able to do. You might be able to do performance testing, security testing, exploratory testing, mutation testing, red team testing, galumphing, all forms of different testing, but you never get a chance because you're too busy doing functional testing and non-functional testing and regression testing and the system test, all the ones that everybody knows and the ones that are common in all the different systems, I hope. But you never get to do the other stuff. And that's actually pretty bad because these are issues that keep coming up in organizations. Security being one of the biggest issues right now. Because we don't take the time to train people and to do security testing because we're too busy doing everything else, we end up with big security holes. And again, that's not just a tester problem, it's a developer issue too. You should know how to build a secure code, but I think we should be able to spend time on this. So when you've freed up the time with your automation, once your automation has made it a little bit easier for you to know what the standard tests are, do the non-standard tests. Add values that would never be in the system normally and see what it does. Try to hack into your own system with permission. Try all these different things because that's what being a tester is. It's trying, it's exploring, it's looking deeper into a product. Once you've automated, you need to know what it is you're going to do with that time that's left over from the automation, or else somebody's going to look at that and say, oh, good. Well, I guess you don't need to come into work today. It's also important to link those to your quality goals. So know the quality aspects of your product. And if you don't know about quality aspects, again, let's talk about that afterwards. But when you know the quality aspects of your product, you can link that to your quality goals. And then you'll know exactly what it is that you want to test and how you want to test it. You may have noticed a pattern to all the tips that I've given you. There's a lot of work to do before you even see a single automation script, before you've coded a thing. And that's because the true value of automation isn't just making things run automatically or run more efficiently. It's knowing more. It's being aware of more. It's sharing more with the rest of the organization than you had before. It's making everybody aware that these processes exist and need to be examined and show results when you examine them. We only make good decisions when we're acutely aware of all the variables. It's the basic principle of you can't control what you don't know. And automation gives us a lot of clarity. And that's something that I think is invaluable as far as automation goes and goes far beyond saving time, saving money, or even just being more efficient. So in summary, automation has a lot of benefits, but it must be consciously applied. You have to think very carefully about how you're going to automate, where you're going to automate, and why you're automating. You should also investigate the value of automation to your organization and make that clear. Have everybody involved, invested, and committed. And then dedicate the time and resources to develop your automation correctly. Make sure everybody is in on it. It's not just somebody's pet project. This is something that changes your entire organization, can at least, and should in order to be valuable. And lastly, remember to learn from all your effort and pass those lessons on like I'm doing now, so that we might all reach the valuable test automation tipping point together. Thank you. I'm going to check the questions list here, and we'll see if we have a fun conversation after the talk. If you'd like to see these slides again, you can probably watch it back on the video, and if you ask nicely to the Spielberg folks, I'm sure they will send you a copy of the slides. I don't mind if you use them. Please staple them to a cubicle or whatever, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for listening, and let's have a chat.
I was still on mute, I believe. Am I? Does everybody hear me? All right, perfect. So I was saying, Rick, thank you very much for your presentation and for the clear explanations. Obviously, if there are any questions, you can ask them in the chat. Rick will stay for a little while to answer the questions and hopefully engage in a nice discussion. So if anybody has one, fire away. Not all at the same time, guys.
Oh, I think I see one on the Q&A.
Yeah.
Environments, multi-systems, multi-platform, multi-data owners, a reset is practically impossible in many cases. Okay, yeah, I actually did come across that, especially with SOP systems. A lot of times they're dependent on every other system to reset at the same time. And that's very much true. Sometimes a full system reset is impossible. And when it is, then it's a lot of fun. But when it is impossible, figure out the factors that impact your automation. So whether a trigger got tripped, or whether there's now data in a place where there wasn't data before, and see if you can fish those out and put them away, and delete them or put them back to where they were, or change the status to before. That's a bit more work than just resetting the environment in general, but it definitely is one of those things that, yeah, it's dependent on the technology. A lot of times you'll have a system that is so interconnected with so many other teams that a reset is impossible, but resetting the flow shouldn't be impossible. I hope that answers your question, Ed. Let's see, which tool is the best to use? That really depends on your company. As I said, sometimes you can use a nuke to swat a fly, and sometimes you just don't have the expertise in your company to do the most. The most versatile tools are ones that you program yourself, Selenium, Gherkin scripts, those kind of things. That's one that if you have the skill set, that's to me the most valuable, because you control everything that works for it. What you miss there is the community. Nobody can help you because it's your own thing. So the bigger tools will have a large community which can help you get the most out of your tools and the most out of your automation. And then there's tools that work with a codeless principle, so that even people who aren't good at coding but understand the pseudocode and understand the general process are able to automate. A lot of those tools are very valuable, but again, you have to work together to figure out how that one's best applied. I worked for a while with a tool called LeapWorks, which is a codeless tool. And that one basically has you drag and drop things like Lego pieces and put together parts of the process. In a way, you would simply copy whatever the process was, which is again where the runbooks come in. And then you would put little verifications on there. And it was very visual. So tools like that are very useful for people who are just starting out. If you feel like you've got more of a coder in you, then go for the ones that are more customizable. Do you have any directives, wisdom on testing on virtual systems and the inconsistencies that may result from those? Indeed, yes. The problem with the virtual systems is, again, what I mentioned about systems being connected or not connected. You probably have to design a lot of mocks. And if you don't have those, then at least inject the data that you would ordinarily have in the system. In a way, it's isolating. You have to isolate all the factors together, but make sure that you're still simulating a proper input and output. You can't do it with systems where they have to talk to another system and then get a response from them. You have to just fake the response. You have to say response is received. A lot of those functionalities are better tested just as individual functionalities. If you want to do automation for that, it's best just to automate the general process of checking those call and responses and apply that script each time. When you have a virtual system, you do have a benefit though. Most of the time when you have a virtual system, you can play around with it and set up the environment as you like. So see if that's a possibility for you. See if it actually gives you more control over your environment, over your process by having it on a virtual system that's separate from everything. Just keep in mind that there's going to be impact of things that you don't see in a virtual system, and you might need to actually test that later. Let's see. Can you recommend any tools for creating system maps and runbooks? Honestly, no, because I haven't used any. Most of the time when I create system maps, I do it in person, which is hard to do with COVID now. But it really is valuable if each team can send a representative that writes out their part of the system. Because one of the most funny things that I found was there were teams that were calling the same system 3 different names. So me just having started at that company, I thought they were 3 different systems. And in essence, it was actually just 3 different names for the exact same system. And those are the things that you find when you talk to people, when you get them together and you actually have a discussion about how the systems get put together. As for creating runbooks, honestly, Excel works great. You just write down the step and then you use your columns, you fill in your test, you fill in what you would do for automation, and then you can put a check mark in status. You can make all kinds of fun macros in there as well if you're a more advanced user, but it doesn't have to be anything fancy, just as long as everyone can understand how the runbook works. Somebody asked what was the name of the tool that I said. The tool was LeapWorks, L-E-A-P-W-O-R-K-S. You can find it online. It's a pretty easy one to see. I think they actually have ad campaigns too. So free advertisement, there you go. Which tool am I using for design and planning? Most of the time, I don't use a tool for the design and planning. I use whichever tool the client is using. Some of those have been more positive, some of them not. A lot of times it's just a Visio, and other times there's a very company-specific tool. So the answer there is there's no real particular tool that I use for design or planning design. The most important part isn't, again, the tool that you use, just when you make the decision to use your tool, know how it works and how you want to use it. Do you have an example of when you would not use test automation? When you're exploring. If you don't know anything about the product yet, if you, maybe it's the first time you've seen a website or a system, or somebody's just hired you, or the company has never really had a testing process before, don't jump right to automation. Explore, spend plenty of time figuring out how everything works, because otherwise you're going to automate things away that either don't happen or that don't happen the way that you think they do. So the less you know about the product and the system, the less you should automate. And another time when you shouldn't use test automation is, again, when the time it takes to automate the process, which is especially true for user interface tests, far exceeds the amount of time it would do to do it manually. Honestly, that's the easiest calculation you can do. If it's going to take you 3 days to do something where it's literally putting your mouse over and clicking, don't automate that unless it's as a part of a large process that absolutely requires that to be automated. In fact, one of the fun things, and I'll just dive into that, one of the fun tips for that, if you're doing GUI testing, try to figure out how much you can do behind the screens, as it were. Because the GUI testing is simply responding to your click on the interface. Once you've established that the click works, then you just need to execute the commands and make sure the commands work the right way. It's a little tip for testing in general. Automating that makes it a lot easier. Let's see. What is it? Emphasize the necessity of thinking of what you want to get. Yeah, very much. You definitely need to focus in your automation on things that you have a goal towards. You got to know what it is that you're trying to build. It's the same with anything. I don't know why it's such an easily forgotten aspect of it. Any developer will tell you you should know what you're developing before you start, unless you're just having fun. But yeah, it's what gets forgotten all the time. Even with automation, even if you know you're testing and you know it really well, plan, plan, plan. Can't stress it enough. Let's see, did I miss any questions here?
I don't believe so. I think we had them all so far. Unless there's, of course, any other comment or question, feel free to ask Rick.
Yeah, I think that's all.
I think as well. Obviously, if there are any questions you are thinking of later on, you can also send me an email or get in contact with me, and I'll try to, or get in contact with Rick. Obviously, we're more than happy to oblige to give you an answer. But most of all, I would like to thank everyone, especially you, Rick, for giving us this presentation. All the attendees for joining us. I hope it has been informational, and that you can continue on with your automation. Thank you very much, Seda. All the credits to Rick, obviously, for the clear explanations. We will be sending out the review of the meetup on a later point. Marketing will make a beautiful video out of this. The link on YouTube has been shared and will be shared as well later on. So from Spielberg on, thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you again at our next webinar, or hopefully you will be able to meet in person and cheer in real life.
All right. Hope to see you all soon. Stay safe. Have fun.